Welcome on into the Cougar Tracks podcast, powered by KSLSports.com. I am your BYU insider, Mitch Harper, with you once again. And it's been an eventful offseason, to say the least, for BYU basketball. And we're going to unpack the offseason that it's been for Cougar hoops, as things are starting to shift more to football going into focus. So I wanted to recap everything that's transpired with BYU basketball. And there's a bright future ahead for Cougar hoops. I want to dive into all of that here in this edition of the Cougar Tracks podcast. And you can follow me on X at Mitch_Harper, Instagram as well. Follow KSL Sports at KSL Sports on X, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and of course, download the KSL Sports app and subscribe to this show wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Apple, Google Play. We're available everywhere that you get your podcast. Leave a 5-star rating and a review. So, seeing over the July 4th holiday, Kevin Young was in the parade in Provo, and obviously getting a warm welcome from fans, excitement abound for BYU basketball, and for good reason. You know, Kevin Young has brought BYU basketball a feeling that they've never experienced. This is one of the winningest programs in college basketball history, top 20 all time. It'd be even higher if you counted the Nick Emery vacated wins. But this program has never had a feeling that anything was possible. They never have. Maybe the 1 year or 2 years with Jimmer Fredette, Danny Ainge, you go back then, but still it always felt like there was a ceiling because, BYU was in the WAC, the Mountain West Conference. Kevin Young and a pairing of the Big 12 Conference and the way he's constructed his roster, his staff, has people believing that anything is attainable with BYU hoops, and that's why I think so many people are excited for the Kevin Young era. And I think people should be. BYU fans should be dreaming big for this BYU basketball program. They should not hold back. Now, Cougar fans have always been labeled as this. They have unrealistic expectations. They always think they're going to win the national title. They're going to win Heismans. I tend to disagree with that. I think that's a bit silly that people always label them that way because, look, I follow Cougar fans. I feel like I got a good pulse of BYU fans, and they're a lot more jaded and cynical than you think. But they're always going to support their team, and their endless passion sometimes gets viewed as overly optimistic, and they inflate the value of a team. But I think with this BYU basketball program and in the landscape of college basketball too, nationally, keep that in mind too, I think anything is possible. No longer is there just a Goliath, a juggernaut in college hoops. I know UConn's incredible right now, 2-time champs and going to have a chance to win a third. But you look at the landscape outside of, Hurley at UConn, who are the star coaches? Who are the just immovable forces in college basketball that say, man, if you ever line up against them, good luck. Look, BYU's in a league with some of the biggest powers in the sport, and they're going to go blow for blow with these teams. I just think there's so much energy and excitement, and all the momentum that was built in year one in the Big 12 with Mark Pope has continued and only grown. And Kevin Young still got to coach some games, and we got to see this product on the court. But BYU basketball is in a great place. And the commitment that we have seen from BYU basketball is impressive. And Kevin Young laid out a vision, and, he didn't need to come to BYU. He had opportunities, as it's been well documented, like he was in the hunt for NBA jobs. But he had opportunities, and BYU had to be committed to him and do everything in their power to put him in a position to have success. And when he says comments that the coaches that he has here at BYU would have been some of the coaches that he would have brought with him potentially on an NBA staff, that's impressive because BYU has committed and leveled up, and I think it's left this feeling of anything is possible because that's always been a piece, regardless of conference affiliation. What does BYU sports look like with top-shelf commitment financially? And I've always believed BYU has more resources than they put off. This notion that, they can't, they're not going to pay. They can't pay. I've always disagreed with that. So the reason for optimism, you pair it up with a young, exciting head coach that's got a vision. He's going to be well prepared. I think the way that he's approached this and viewed this program, and that he wants to be here. I think that's another reason for the excitement as well, is that Kevin Young, because of all the opportunities that he could have stayed as an assistant with the Suns, he could have continued pursuing the head coaching positions in the NBA. He had opportunities, but he wanted to be at BYU, and this was a place that he eyed. He wanted to be here, and I think that leaves a lot of energy and excitement for the program. Kevin Young was a home run hire. And then his staff, getting Will Voigt, getting Tim Fanning, Linehan. This is a really good staff. Chris Burgess, Doug Stewart. Top shelf across the board with a focus on preparation for the NBA, but also to win at a high level in college basketball. And this roster, I believe, has the makings to be the best roster that I've ever seen from BYU since the Jimmer years. And look, the Jimmer years were light on depth. This is top to bottom one of the best rosters I've ever seen assembled in BYU basketball. And I've been following BYU basketball since about the Roger Reed days. I really kind of kicked into my following of BYU, oddly enough, during the 1-25 season. I just found it fascinating to see a program building from absolute rock bottom and working its way up. And in that time frame, this is one of the best rosters that I've ever seen assembled. Because BYU's got the best of every avenue you have in constructing a roster in college basketball. You've got the returning experience with Dallin Hall, with Fousseyni Traore. You've got Richie Saunders coming back. Then you've also got the specialist with a Mawot Mag, who's going to be probably one of the best defensive players in the Big 12, potentially this season. You got a Keba Keita, who can be a rim roller 5 for you. You've got Elijah Crawford, who can be that specialist backup point guard to Dallin Hall and give him a necessary breather or two, or one a night is just not falling for him. Crawford can step in, and there's not this epic fall off a cliff drop-off in that backcourt. And then you've got the high-potential NBA draft prospects like a Jager Demine, Canon Catchings. Canon Catchings not as highly rated, in my view, as Jager Demine. I know ESPN's Jonathan Givony, who knows the NBA draft inside and out. He's got Cannon as a first-round prospect in the way too early look for 2025. Jager is viewed as a lottery pick. So, again, you got those three buckets constructing a roster. It makes for a great roster build. And so many questions about Kevin Young centered around recruiting and how is he going to be able to piece together a college roster. He did a marvelous job, and he prioritized retention first, and that was a great foundation because getting Dallin Hall and Richie Saunders back was epic. And speaking of those guys, I got to mention, coming up here on July 13th, I highly recommend all of you get your tickets. I'm going to be hosting a panel July 13th at 4 p.m. at the Ultimate Sports Bash, Mountain America Credit Union Expo Center in Sandy. I'm going to be hosting a BYU basketball panel with Richie Saunders, with Dallin Hall, with Trevinell. It's going to be a lot of fun. Going to have some probably Q&A, I would imagine. Going to be tossing those guys questions and have just kind of a fun conversation about BYU basketball because there's so much excitement. And those guys, they had opportunities to go elsewhere or move on and not run it back with Kevin Young. But I think one thing about Kevin Young, and look, I'm learning about him too, and I think that's what makes it so exciting and fascinating is this is not just some born and raised BYU guy, yet he kind of feels like it instantly, and he loves BYU and wants to be at BYU, but he's very prepared, he's very direct, his pitches are very in-depth, very detailed. These players come away impressed, and when you pair it up with that open, direct, honest communication with his resume and how he can pretty much dial up anyone in the basketball world that has a massive name. His network is immense. I just think it sets, BYU up for, why not play for this guy? Why not give him a chance? And if they have success in year one, I think sky's the limit. And I think that sky's the limit in recruiting for Kevin Young and this program to take this thing to new heights. Because despite all the successes BYU basketball has had over the years, this is a program that really has so much potential still to rewrite the record books. You've got the program with the most NCAA tournament bids without a Final Four. You haven't won a conference tournament since 2001. You haven't won a round of 64 games since 2011. Yet this is a stable, consistent winning program. They don't have that, postseason success that really, to elevate a brand, to elevate a program, that's where you got to win in college basketball. And BYU has not done much of that. And if Kevin Young can build up this team and get them to a point where they're playing their best basketball in March, that's what you want. You don't want them to peak in December. You don't want them to peak in mid-January. You want them to peak in March. And I feel like that's going to be kind of what I feel could be the potential here for this team. Now, look, you want to hit the ground running and you want to just fly high from the jump, but I think it's going to take a little bit of time. There's going to be a filling out process for this group and just kind of getting used to one another. But to have those returning veterans, I think helps the cause and brings everyone together. I thought it was noteworthy when Kevin Young pointed out that Dallin Hall, Richie Saunders are some of the leaders early on for year one and under his watch. And I think Mawot Mag could be one of those guys eventually too. I think as he kind of entrenches himself into the program, he's kind of got a feel where he could be a leader of this team. But here's the roster for BYU in 2024-2025, year one under Kevin Young. The veteran of the group is Trevin Knell. And again, he'll be on the panel with me. I'll be hosting at the Ultimate Sports Bash. Get your tickets. Sponsored by KSL Sports. Trevin Knell, he committed to Dave Rose. I often forget that. He committed to Dave Rose, was once a Cal commit to Quanzo Martin, and flipped to BYU and Dave Rose. Then he played every year for Mark Pope, and now he's part of year one with Kevin Young. Trevin Knell is an important piece for this BYU team. And these returning players, I'm fascinated to see the leaps, the growth, how they're utilized maybe in different ways, if at all, under Kevin Young. And I got to imagine he's going to draw up some, unique differences and opportunities to get these guys to be their best potential selves. Because I think Trevin Knell, man, when he is on, he is the best shooter potentially in college basketball. I mean, there's not many guys in college hoops that can knock down 9 threes in a game. So when he's feeling it, man, it's a sight to behold. And Trevin's going to play an important role for this team. Now, is it going to be a starter? No. I don't think that's going to be the case this year. Last year, it just kind of worked for BYU to have him in the starting five. This team, he's going to probably be more off the bench. But I think he's also a great locker room guy that can bring everyone together. Mawot Mag also, coming in from Rutgers, defensive specialist. You don't need everyone to be an absolute rock star on the offensive end. And Mag, but I think he can do a lot of special things, and he can be the player that locks up the best offensive threat on the opponent and can be a lockdown guy. And I just think he's a fascinating addition for BYU. I honestly thought he felt like a San Diego State guy, but BYU gets him. It was a really good get. Trey Stewart comes back. One final year for Trey. He's a senior this season. Look, I don't have much expectations for Trey going into this year because to this point, he hasn't had really an opportunity. So it's still kind of an incomplete grade as to what Trey Stewart can be at this level. I've seen many of practices with Trey Stewart I've always been impressed with his athleticism. I've always felt that he can be a guy defensively that can be a positive impact and can go get some loose balls. He can, flip possession or flip momentum and make a key play or two that maybe doesn't get measured in a box score. He can be that guy. And I'm curious to see what his final year can produce at BYU. Fus Traore, honorable mention All Big 12 player a season ago. Fus, I think no matter what happens here, Fus is someone that should be always remembered by BYU fans for the fact that he was committed through thick and thin. It didn't matter the coach. It didn't matter the staff. Like, he is a BYU guy. And I think there's just something cool about that. It's a bit of a throwback. And Fus just had his feet planted here. He loves it at BYU. He's an excellent student. And he's an excellent basketball player, too. I think the what I want to see, though, from Fus this year is him to extend his range. He has to, because Fus is an incredible force around the basket. He is an outstanding player. His wingspan is great, and his physicality is top shelf. I mean, he is one of the few players. I watched a ton of Big 12 basketball last year. He is one of the few players that was able to move Hunter Dickinson off the block and kind of back him up a bit and create space to get a shot off in the paint. Very few can do that. Dickinson is an incredibly strong player in the post. Like, not many people do that. And Fus made it look easy at times. And that just speaks to Fus's strength in the post. But can he extend that range? That's the piece I'm really curious to see for Fus. And he's got to stay healthy, too. The last couple years, he's been plagued by hamstring injuries. And if he can stay healthy, think back to last season, before he suffered that hamstring in the Vegas showdown, he was outstanding. I mean, he looked like a guy that was ready to be a second-team All-Big 12 guy. Like, Fus looked outstanding. And then he got that hamstring in Vegas, I believe it was against NC State. And then it was just kind of a work in progress, and he kind of got his feet back under him, in mid-February. But then it was just like, you just wish that could have been a whole season. So I hope for Fus that he can stay healthy, because this is the senior year. This is one final ride, and I just think Kevin Young's going to do a lot of good for him. And then Chris Burgess comes back, too. There was a great relationship there with Fus. I'm just really excited to see what Fus can become this year under Kevin Young. I'm also excited to see Dawson Baker. Dawson Baker, UC Irvine transfer. I love the potential of Dawson Baker, a recent newlywed, was on a honeymoon during the recent summer practices in June. Dawson Baker working his way back from a foot injury. He had surgery. He's still got 2 years of eligibility remaining. Is that foot fully healed? And if it is, what a versatile guy that I feel like you probably have coming off the bench. And I think he could be a starter. He's that good. But I just think that how the roster has been built, you get incredible value from him coming off the bench. And if that foot is healed, he will be a very good player for BYU. Dallin Hall is one of the stars of this program, one of the faces of the program. Junior season, third year out of Fremont High School. And last year he was an honorable mention All Big 12 player. And there were games last year where he won. He took BYU to the finish line and got wins. I mean, that Kansas game, he knocks down that three over Dickinson. That's one of the iconic moments in BYU basketball history. I mean, that's going to be remembered in BYU lore for decades. I mean, that will be something 20, 30 years from now. You will remember that shot, that win in Allen Fieldhouse. Iconic moment. Dallin Hall delivered that for you. And I'm curious to see Dallin, what leaps he takes in his game. I think that's what's so exciting about this roster is that you've got a good foundation. But you also have a bunch of guys that I think they're nowhere near satisfied with what they've been to this point. I think they feel like there's so much more to continue to improve. And Dallin Hall, I just feel like he could be a second-team All Big 12 too, maybe. I mean, he's got that potential. Maybe he could even go higher, because of his ball handling ability. His assist ratio was off the charts last year in the Big 12. Got to take care of the turnovers, though, at times. You think back to the Utah game, the Iowa State game on the road, 2 costly turnovers late. And, I think he also can improve his three-point shooting, too. That's an area where he can improve in his game. If he can become one of the top three-point shooters in the Big 12, he will have pro looks, because this team is going to get a lot of eyeballs on them because of Demeen, because of Catchings, and I think because of Dallin Hall. Even before Demeen and Catchings were possibilities, before Kevin Young was even hired, I've always felt Dallin Hall has NBA potential, maybe, to play in the pros after his days at BYU. And I'm really excited to see what Dallin becomes this season under Kevin Young. Richie Saunders, he's operating in the guard line during that June practice. I still think he ends up being the starting 3 for BYU. You go Dallin Hall, Jager, Demeen, Richie Saunders. Probably Canon Catchings, I'd say, at the 4. And then you go with Keba Keita at the 5. We'll get to those guys a little bit later here. But Saunders, I think, will be one of the biggest beneficiaries of this new staff. Now, these guys, and he even admitted his head was spinning after those first handful of practices in summer. So it's going to take time. But Saunders, he could do so many different things for BYU. And him solely being like a defensive specialist, getting downhill on the offensive end, I think he's got more to his game than just that. I think he can be an all-around 3-and-D type guy for BYU on this team. And I think that Kevin Young sees that ability, and I think that this staff does too with him. I think that's why he's going to be in the starting 5 for BYU on opening night. Keba Keita comes in from Utah. This was an impressive get. Chris Burgess gets hired by BYU. Shortly after, Keba Keita goes in the portal. You could say, was it coincidence or was it planned? Who knows? But the thing is that clearly there's a strong rapport with Chris Burgess, and the relationship there between those two, and just set stability. Keba Keita's got his host family is in Utah County, and it's just kind of operating business as usual in many respects for him. He's just now wearing blue instead of red. And I think that he's going to evolve a lot for BYU in his career, because his first 2 years at Utah, I remember that game, and you can go back and listen to the Cougar Tracks podcast recap from that Utah loss in December. I thought in stretches he was one of the best players on the court, him coming off the bench. And with him being behind Brandon Carlson, he was naturally coming off the bench, but now I think at BYU, he's going to take on a massive role for this team. And that highlight dunk that he had, that BYU shared on social media, it was epic. And, I mean, that guy's got explosive athleticism. I mean, he might be – I mean, you look at this roster, might be the best athlete on the team because he's just explosive. I mean, he can get up, and there's a lot of power behind his athleticism too. And it makes it very intriguing what BYU can do with him. Jager Demeen. Now, that's the latest pronunciation I've been told officially by BYU on Jager Demeen. Again, I want to hear it directly from his mouth eventually, but that is what we've heard to this juncture. Safe to say, though, Jager has unbelievable potential, and his resume and his profile is to the likes of which we've never seen before in BYU basketball history. BYU has signed heralded recruits, big-time players. There are very few, if any, that arrive on campus and are instantly viewed as NBA draft prospects the moment they arrive on campus. That's Jager Demeen. Danny Ainge, when he came out of Eugene, Oregon, he was heralded one of the top recruits in the country. Sean Bradley, one of the top recruits in the country. Sean Bradley, probably just a case of 7'6", And then he gets to BYU and dominates. But Jager, BYU or not, he's an NBA dude. And to get that guy is incredible. And he didn't have to come to BYU. He had options, Illinois, other schools. And he comes to BYU. And if Jager has success, I think, one, he will. Two, I think that it sets off potentially a world where these high-level European players say, you know what? Maybe I'll go spend a year, these under U18 players out in Europe, I'll go spend a year in college basketball, make $1 million or whatever it ends up being. We don't know the specifics of what Jager is getting in NIL. It's been reported by some outlets 1.5. Remarkable, if that's the case, to think of BYU with having millionaire athletes. But if you have success, if you're a European player and you want another, big paycheck potentially, play at a high level, come over to the United States, earn some NIL, and then get ready once again for the NBA. And which better coach than Kevin Young to help make that happen? Jager is fascinating because you want him to continue to level up in his NBA draft profile just because he's viewed as a lottery pick right now. And again, I think he will be an NBA pick no matter what. But there have been guys like last year, UCLA had some players that were viewed as one-and-dones, and it didn't work out that great, and many of them are returning back to college basketball. And look, it's not a bad thing to go back to college basketball, especially if you can make a lot of money. And it'd be great if Jager can just stay multiple years and thrive at BYU, but it's also not a bad thing if he's a one-and-done. He's a, top 5, top 10 pick. It's not bad at all for BYU. I just think the size, the versatility, he's so smooth. When you watch his highlights and his ability, he just has incredible instincts is what strikes me the moment you watch his highlights. And I was just poured over hours of any sort of clips that you can get on Jager in this Real Madrid team. And I just think he's just got an incredible feel for the game that makes him feel mature beyond his years. And he's played at such a high level already as a young person where I feel like he's just ready to contribute instantly at an incredibly high level for this BYU team, and he's going to be expected to. I'm curious to see how he does handle the physicality of the Big 12 because as we've seen in this league, the refs, they're not calling charges. It is a rugged conference, and I'm curious to see how he kind of matches up and handles the physicality of the league. But I just think he's going to thrive, and I think he's going to do a great job in this setting. And what a catch for Kevin Young to get a player that really kind of set and created headlines for this program across college basketball and the NBA draft world as well. Because now so many eyes are going to be on BYU every single night they play. And that is a big, big deal for the program. I mean, he's the type of player that's got the profile and the resume that says he could be someone that on a handful of nights in a season could get a triple-double. I mean, BYU's got the Mr. Triple-Double in their history with Kyle Collinsworth. He was out of this world stat lines in college basketball. It might be a little bit tougher with how balanced this roster is, but Jager can just do it all, and he can fill up a stat sheet like no other. And he's just incredibly smooth. He's got a beautiful touch, too, around the basket and from deep as well. So I think massive expectations, and for good reason, because he is one of the most polished products I think I've ever seen roll into BYU in my lifetime. Canon Catchings, top 40 recruit, highest rated recruit in the internet era that BYU has signed from the high school ranks. Flipped from Purdue to BYU. I think he's probably your starting 4 this season, in my opinion. And you know what I think is going to be an interesting dynamic here is making sure to maintain these players that do have lofty NBA projections and making sure that they still buy into this current group, this current team, and the mission and the goals of what they're trying to accomplish this year. So that'll be, kind of an interesting dynamic in how these returning players welcome these guys in and how it all blends together. I mean, that locker room nuance is important. It's critical to the success of this team. But, I think Canon Catchings steps in, and I think he's going to have an open mind and act like a pro. I mean, I think that this is going to be a program that you're going to be treated like a pro, and they are. I mean, they're making money. These are professional athletes, and you're going to walk and operate like a pro. I would love it if the media access is like the pros, where you do open locker room, but I don't expect that, but it'd be great. It'd be great. I'm just saying. As a media member, I'm just throwing it out there. But I think Canon Catchings can, be an inside and out guy for BYU, and like Jager, just kind of the physicality piece, how he handles the Big 12. I think it's always interesting when you're talking about someone who's only 18 that's expected to take on a big role, but I think he's going to be very good. I'm sure there'll be some growing pains. There'll be games where it's just not working for him. But I think that Catchings has just an incredible upside. I mean, Purdue wanted him badly. And Painter, his comments that he had to the media, I don't think it's, I think that a lot of people looked at those comments and said, sour grapes. For most coaches, you could probably say that. But for Painter, he has had a track record where he does do this, where if you're not all in on Purdue, he'll probably just say, move on. And he's done it for a long time, and he's built a very good basketball program that finally broke through this past year to the Final Four, and they reached the national championship game. So I don't think it's any sort of sour grapes. I know he also had those moments and comments with Matt Harms, too, back a couple years back during COVID. But Canon Catchings made his own move. Matt Painter made his move. It's fine. And BYU is a massive beneficiary, and I think Catchings is a beneficiary too by being around BYU and being in this Kevin Young operation that's going to prepare him to be a pro. And then rounding out the roster, Elijah Crawford, Brody Kozlowski, two talented freshmen that in years past, these type of recruits would have had the weight of the world on their shoulders in some respects going into a BYU team. Now they can kind of take a slower pace role where, yes, you got to learn and be ready to go to contribute on any given night, but the weight of expectations are not on them. It's not like Jager and Canon where they're stepping in and they gotta be dudes from night one. And whereas Elijah Crawford, Kozlowski, they're going to be reserves. Kozlowski probably a little bit deeper on that bench. Crawford going to be right behind Dallin Hall, I would expect, on that depth chart. You got one scholarship remaining. And I think that Kevin Young should be very patient with that. There's no rush because no one you add between now and the end of September when training camp starts is going to take minutes from this crew. So be patient. And I think that my argument is that there's always that chance when someone enrolls at a school and they go, this is not what it's cracked up to be. This is not what I was promised. And then they bail. And maybe they get someone in the winter and it's a high upside guy that's got NBA potential. Get that dude. So I think that's, to me, the move for BYU. Just be really patient, or you know what? Just save the scholarship altogether and call it good for this season, and this is the roster you roll with. But Kevin Young did note he'd like to use all 13 scholarships this season. The schedule for BYU is going to be a lot tougher than it's been in the past, including the non-conference. The non-conference, I think, is underrated for BYU this season because of some of the nuances that they have with how it lines up. And look, the official non-conference schedule has not been laid out yet, but we do have details on November 5th, reported details. November 5th, Central Arkansas, that's expected to be the first game of the season. November 13th versus Queens, connection to Queens, Bobby Hordusky, who was the director of basketball ops under Mark Pope. He's an assistant coach there. November 16th versus Idaho. November 28th to the 29th, the Ratty Children's Invitational, Purdue, NC State, Ole Miss. you got to think that the schedule makers are going to line up BYU and Purdue, right? Because of the Canon Catchings storyline. You've got to do that. I mean, that's too juicy to pass up. But Purdue, Final Four team a season ago. NC State, Final Four team a season ago. Ole Miss, very good last year under Chris Beard, year one. It would have been nice to see Arkansas and John Calipari and Notre Dame, but still a pretty loaded field in San Diego over Thanksgiving. And then December 3rd at Providence, who could be a top 25 team next season. December 7th at Wyoming. That's tough. That's a tougher schedule than last year in non-conference. And then, oh, by the way, you've got 2 fewer non-conference games, so that naturally makes the schedule tougher by having 20 league games. And the 20 league game schedule for BYU, their matchups were revealed, and I thought BYU had maybe one of the weaker Big 12 schedules in terms of matchups because it helps that Utah, their rival, is 2 of the games, but a rivalry game is always going to be difficult. BYU experienced that last year, losing to Utah at the Huntsman Center, but I thought BYU got a pretty favorable draw. They don't have to go to Lawrence. They don't have to go to Lubbock. They don't have to go to Manhattan, some of the tougher, historic gyms in the Big 12 era. I think that was pretty favorable. You got a home and home with Arizona. You don't have to go to Waco either at Baylor. They come to Provo. I like the setup for BYU, and I think it's going to be awesome seeing BYU back in the McHale Center against Arizona. Last time BYU was there, Jimmer Fredette set a McHale Center record with 49 points. So the schedule, though, it's going to be a gauntlet in the Big 12. I mean, it's going to be an absolute buzzsaw. Any game you can win on the road, it's a huge deal. I've currently got BYU 7th place in the Big 12 Conference in my summer power rankings for the league. And you might think, wow, that's a little bit low considering the excitement of the program. But I'm telling you, the Big 12 this year, it leveled up in a big way. Houston's my number 1, Kansas number 2. I've got Iowa State number 3, Baylor number 4, VJ Edgecombe, the freshman, 5-star recruit, highest-rated signee in Baylor history. He tore it up for the Bahamas recently. Arizona's going to be good with the return of Caleb Love. Cincinnati's going to be loaded. Dan Skillings, Aziz Bandango, they're pretty much all back. Jizzle James. It's going to be a really good team next season. And then BYU. And then you still got Texas Tech, Kansas State. I mean, Kansas State got Coleman Hawkins for a reported $2 million. Texas Tech loaded up in the transfer portal. They did lose Pop Isaacs to Creighton. BYU was in the mix for them. But, I mean, this is a great league. UCF's on the rise. I thought Utah even has done some decent things in the portal since losing some staff and players. Myro Little was a good addition. I just think every night in this conference is going to be epic. And BYU's home schedule is just, wow. You could have only dreamed of that sort of schedule years ago for BYU at the Marriott Center, and Cougar fans are going to experience that every single night in Big 12 play. But in closing, BYU basketball should be in the field of 68 this season. I fully expect that they'll be back dancing in March with this team. They're going to have probably some losses, and they might have fewer wins than last season or maybe a lower ranking in the Big 12 standings, but they can also exceed. And the fact is, though, you lost a coach that kind of created some stability, and you've only leveled up. And I think it's going to continue to go higher for BYU basketball in the years to come with Kevin Young. But that's going to do it for this edition of the Cougar Tracks podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to still have BYU basketball content throughout the summer and fall as we get closer to the season because BYU Hoops is going to be huge. And look, it's always a big deal. It's always a massive deal. I've never understood the thought of people when they go, BYU is a football school, BYU is a basketball school now. Like, why can't they be an everything school? BYU sports is a big-time deal. Like, BYU basketball, anytime they line up, it's a big deal. And I know college basketball maybe doesn't have the mainstream connectivity like football does, but, man, it's Big 12 basketball, and BYU basketball in the Marriott Center, that's big events. So we will be covering all of it here on the Cougar Tracks podcast and on Cougar Sports Saturday on KSL News Radio. Saturday from noon to 3. We'll have you covered with everything regarding BYU basketball this offseason, getting ready for the new era under Kevin Young. So make sure to subscribe to this podcast. Leave a 5-star rating and review. It helps out the show a ton. And I'll talk to you next time here on the Cougar Tracks podcast, and it's powered by KSLSports.com.